Okay, we're in this series called Inside Out, and we're going through the books of 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings in the Old Testament section of our Bibles. And so what we're doing, the reason why we call it Inside Out is we're looking at really, it's like a character study. We're looking at different key individuals in these books, and we're looking at their life and going, how does what's on the inside of them actually impact and come out on the outside, on real life? Does our character ultimately impact our life? Is there a real motivation to go, maybe I ought to work on some stuff inside of me, even though other people can't see it, because eventually it is going to impact you. That's the kind of argument of this. Okay, so today we're going to look at this guy named Saul who had some blind spots in his character. He had some stuff that he didn't deal with. And specifically what we're going to look at today is the area of fear, of anxiety, of worry, of insecurity. I mean, I'm sure none of you struggle with any of that. Maybe it's just me, but me and Saul. But Saul definitely. What we're going to see as we look at this, he's going to confront a moment of his life that squeezes him, that puts the pressure on, and what comes out of him is that he buckles, that he allows fear to inform his thinking. And as the story reads, it really is an informative kind of description about how does fear, if we allow fear to grow inside of us, how does that actually impact us, our decisions, the things that actually, the choices that we make in our lives, our actions. We're going to get such a clear picture of the way that works as we go through this story. But before I read the story, I need to set it up a little bit, because last week, we were in chapter 8 of 1 Samuel. We're looking at the people of Israel. And they're going, hey, we don't want God to be our king directly. We want a king like everybody else. All the other nations around us have a king. At that point in the life of the people of Israel, it was a people group that was tribal. And there was different judges and things, but it wasn't a unified political nation rallied around a central king. And so they wanted that. And so this is a pivotal moment in kind of the history of the people of Israel. What happens right after what we looked at, chapter 8 last week, was God says, okay, here's your king. He chooses a guy named Saul and says, this guy's going to be your king. Samuel, this prophet and judge, he anoints Saul. He gathers his tribes together and says, hey, this is the king. They have like a ceremony, right? But in that ceremony where they make Saul the first king of Israel, some people are really excited about it. They're like, yeah, all right, Saul's our king. But then there's other people that are like, no, wait, that guy, he's not my king. No, I don't want to follow him, because they're still like used to autonomy. And Saul is not bringing any credentials. He's not the son of a king. He's never been king before, right? He's just a guy that God chooses and says, he's your king, okay? So Israel as a people, they're getting a king, but they're still used to being tribal, right? It's like, trying to herd cats. They're going to go their own way. And so that's Israel, okay? So then something happens. There is this city called Jabesh Gilead, and they're attacked by some enemies called the Ammonites, and the city is besieged. It's kind of surrounded, and they feel like, they're going to get us. They're going to kill us all. And so they go, hey, what if we surrender to you? We'll serve you, okay? But don't kill us all. And then the Ammonites say, okay, you can surrender to us, but we're going to just gouge out the right eye of every person in your city as a way of humiliating and disrespecting all of Israel. It's like this statement of saying, well, we can just do this to you. We're going to disrespect you. And brutal times, right? Brutal times. Can you imagine? You're just living in your city. You get surrounded by an army, and they're like, sure, you can become our servants, and we're going to gouge your right eye out. That's just kind of the way it goes. So the people of Jabesh Gilead, they go, okay, give us a week to think about it. All right, that's a big decision. Give us a week. So in that week, they send out a messenger to Saul, and they say, hey, here's what's happening. So Saul, it says the Spirit of God falls on Saul, and he gets angry. And he says, give me 2 oxen. And he chops them up in pieces. And he says, send these pieces out into all of Israel and tell them, this is what Saul is going to do to your oxen if you don't come right now and follow Saul and fight with me. And so the terror of God fell on all of Israel, and everyone responded. They were like, okay, all right, let's do it. And so Saul amassed this great army, and they went and they fought the Ammonites, and they defeated them. No one's eyes got gouged out in Jabesh Gilead, okay? And so now everybody's like, hooray, we have a king, Saul's amazing. And so they actually have then a second ceremony to make him king again, because now everybody's like on board with it. And so I share all that as context because that informs now we're going to drop in to chapter 13, to a situation where Saul's fear and insecurity and anxiety are really put to the test. But you have to understand the backdrop to understand the level of fear and insecurity that he feels, because he has stepped into this role as king where like no one's done this before in Israel. He has no track to run on. He doesn't have any credibility. He's got his haters, people that are against him going, you can't do this. I'm not following you. Can you imagine the kind of crushing pressure that he's feeling? Just going, I don't know why, but I got picked by God and now I'm going to be the king. And so the text doesn't tell us what's happening on the inside of Saul, but we can decipher some things by his actions and by what's happening, that probably he's feeling quite a lot of insecurity. Probably he's asking the question, can I really do this? Right? A question that probably many of us have asked at various points in our life. When we step into something that feels bigger than we can handle, right? It might be a relationship and you're going, I'm terrified of marriage because I don't know if I can stay. Like, can I be a person that commits my whole life to somebody else? Can I actually do that? Maybe you find out that you got a baby on the way and you're like, I'm terrified. I don't know if I can be a parent. I don't know if I have what it takes to be responsible for another human being. Maybe you step into a new job or a new level of responsibility at work and you're going like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I have what it takes to really do what's required to be successful in this new job. I think there's so many places in life where we could feel the weight of pressure coming down on us, and it causes us to second guess and to kind of, it produces fear, worry, anxiety inside of us. Saul is going through all of this. Even at his first ceremony when they were trying to pick him, they're like, where's Saul? And it's like they had to go find him because he's hiding under the luggage. He was afraid to even come out and be crowned king, right? So he's dealing with fears and worries and anxieties. But now he experiences this great success and he rallies people around him. And so now he's feeling probably pretty good about that. And now we drop into chapter 13, okay? And let's read what happens next in the story of Saul. It says this in chapter 13, verse 1. Saul was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned over Israel 42 years. Saul chose 3,000 men from Israel, 2,000 who were with him at Michmash and in the hill country of Bethel, and 1,000 who were with Jonathan, who's his son, at Gibeah in Benjamin. The rest of the men he sent back to their homes. Jonathan attacked the Philistine outpost at Gibeah, and the Philistines heard about it. Let me stop for a second. The Philistines are like the arch rivals of Israel. They're constantly fighting back and forth. Sometimes the Philistines win, sometimes the Israelites win, but it's a large part of this whole chunk of the Bible is this kind of rivalry between the Israelites and the Philistines. Okay, so then Saul had the trumpet blown throughout the land and said, let the Hebrews hear. So all of Israel heard the news. Saul has attacked the Philistine outpost, and now Israel has become obnoxious to the Philistines. And the people were summoned to join Saul at Gilgal. The Philistines assembled to fight Israel with 3,000 chariots and 6,000 charioteers and soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They went up and they camped at Michmash, east of Beth Aven. And when the Israelites saw that their situation was critical and their army was hard pressed, they hid in caves and thickets among the rocks and in pits and cisterns. Some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul remained at Gilgal with the troops, and all the troops with him were quaking with fear. He waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and Saul's men began to scatter. So he said, bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings. And Saul offered up the burnt offering. Just as he finished making the offering, Samuel arrived and went out to greet him. What have you done? Asked Samuel. Saul replied, when I saw that the men were scattering and that you did not come at the set time and that the Philistines were assembling at Michmash, I thought, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal. I have not sought the Lord's favor, and so I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering. You've done a foolish thing, Samuel said. You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time. But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him ruler of his people, because you have not kept the Lord's command. All right, we're gonna stop there. Okay, so what's going on here is Saul and his son Jonathan, now they've trimmed back the army a little bit. They just had this big victory, and now they're kind of like, okay, Saul's got 2,000 soldiers. Jonathan, his son, has 1,000. And the text says that Jonathan goes and attacks the Philistines, a Philistine outpost. Now, we don't really know what Saul thinks about this. If Saul was like, ordered him to or wanted him to do it, or if Saul was like, no, what are you doing? We don't really know. But Jonathan goes off and does this, okay? He goes and he pokes the bear. This big enemy, like, why are you attacking them? Well, their response, of course, is like, oh, you attacked our outpost. All right, we're going to bring it. Okay, so thousands of chariots and this kind of ominous line. Soldiers, as many as the sand on the seashore. I don't know how many that is, but I think it's a lot, right? I think it's like that. They array themselves out there, and it's like, there's so many people out there, I can't even count how many people out there. So what's going on now in Israel is that people are seeing what's sizing up in front of them, and they're going, when I look back, I don't see as many people as when I look forward at the enemy. And so they get scared. Fear grips them, and people start hiding in caves and cisterns and even running away, crossing the Jordan, going, I'm out of here. So they're gripped with fear. Now I want to talk about this for a second. There's kind of two types of fears that I want to talk about for a minute to kind of delineate, because I know there's a lot of fears and worries and anxieties that can take hold of us. And some of them are reasonable fears, right? Some of them are reasonable. This in my mind would be a reasonable fear. That if I'm standing there looking at just, more people than I can count that want to kill me, it's reasonable that there would be a response inside of me that's fear-based, right? That's why a lot of armies, have things in place, including the U.S. Army now. Like if you desert, if you're facing war and you desert in wartime, you're going to be court-martialed and you might be killed for that. In lots of other armies at different times throughout history, lots of times they just kill you while it was happening. Like, hey, you're going to turn and run? Well, we're just going to shoot you right now. Because that's what you kind of need to do that to get over that kind of fear, right? It is natural and reasonable for a soldier to have fear as you're facing an army. But many of us are not in that kind of a position, and yet we still have a lot of fear in our life, because there's this other thing called unreasonable fears that plague us, that get a hold of us. It's where we either take a reasonable fear and we magnify it into this massive thing, or we just manufacture fears about things that aren't even real. So differences between these. So my kids like to swim, and I think it's a reasonable fear that I have that if I leave them unsupervised in a swimming pool, they might drown. That's a fear of mine, right? And so I don't do that. I watch them when they're swimming. I'm constantly pulling their head up out of the water, right? Because they just want to. So it's that would be like a reasonable fear. An unreasonable fear is if I were to say, you know what? People drown in swimming pools, and so I'm just not swimming. I'm not going to go in the ocean. I'm not going to ever go in a pool. I'm not ever going to swim because it's dangerous. I might die by drowning in the pool. Well, that's probably an unreasonable fear. That's probably overly limiting your life because of a what-if scenario. Maybe you're somebody that you go, hey, I'm kind of afraid of heights, and so a couple years ago there was a guy on TV that strung a rope across a section of the Grand Canyon, and he did a tightrope walk across the Grand Canyon. Right? I'm never doing that. Okay, I'm just I am never going to do that. I am afraid that I would die, right? That's a reasonable fear to go, I'm not going to tightrope across the Grand Canyon. Now, if you go, I'm afraid of heights, I'm never going near the Grand Canyon. That would just terrify me to, I'm just never going to see it. That's an unreasonable fear, right? That's like, well, you could go and enjoy it, but just not walk right out to the edge and try to take a selfie leaning over, just don't do that. And you'll be okay. And but here's the problem with unreasonable fears. If we don't deal with them, if we don't push them down, drive them out, right? Challenge them, they stack up and they add, and more unreasonable fears, and it diminishes our life. It limits our life. How many Grand Canyons are there in your life where you go, I'm just scared, I'm afraid of that, so I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to do that. And pretty soon you end up just stuck in your house going, I'm not going outside of my house because it's a dangerous world out there. Every unreasonable fear limits us. It diminishes us. It makes our life smaller. Okay? So unreasonable fears, we got to work on those. We got to push against those. Reasonable fears, it's actually good to have those, right? That is part of what keeps us alive. When we have reasonable fears. And so sometimes, though, it's hard to tell the difference between the two. That's where some of the challenge comes of trying to go, okay, is this actually like an appropriate fear, a reasonable fear that I have about this thing, or is it an unreasonable fear? Sometimes we take a reasonable fear and we blow it up into an unreasonable fear, which is what we're going to see Saul do. Okay, what his soldiers they're reacting in fear. Even the guys that are with him. Okay, so in verse 8, it says, or verse 7, Saul remained at Gilgal, and all the troops with him were quaking with fear. They're shaking. They're so afraid. They're quaking with fear. And it says, Saul waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and Saul's men began to scatter. So even the guys that are with him, the soldiers that are with their king, they're looking at the army coming. They're shaking. They're going, what am I doing? I'm a farmer. I'm out of here, guys. I don't want to do this, right? I'm gonna go home, right? I'm gonna go hide in my cistern and hope that everything works itself out. So the thing then that I think gives us a real glimpse into how fear works, okay, I don't want to study the soldiers. I want to study Saul, okay? Because the soldiers I kind of understand. I don't think deserting is a good thing, but I get it, right? That's a terrifying ordeal to face that. But Saul, he's a leader over this army, okay? He's standing there. He's been told by Samuel, the prophet and priest of God, okay? Samuel has this dual role. Samuel is the only guy that's allowed as a priest to offer up the offering, okay? So here's the problem. Here's where Saul kind of makes his mistake and offers this burnt offering. You might be reading that going, what's the big deal here? But see, God had given Saul as king authority over a whole lot of things, like a whole bunch of stuff that he has authority over to run his kingdom. But he doesn't have authority over the priesthood. He can't act as a king and a priest. God's not given him that authority. The only person that's going to become prophet, priest, and king is going to be Jesus Christ. And so now we live in a time, we live in an age where where we get to relate directly to God through the person of Jesus Christ. You don't have to come and hear me talk about the Bible for 45 minutes to get access to God. All of us get to have direct access to relationship with God, to forgiveness of our sins, because Jesus had the role of prophet, priest, and king, okay? He's our priest. Saul is living in a different age. He doesn't get to be the priest and offer up God, the burnt offering and sacrifice to God. He doesn't get to do that. And yet, fear starts working on him. Okay, so here's what happens with Saul. Watch this, because I think a very similar thing happens with you and I. When Sam, right, I love the story that right after he does the burnt offering, Saul does, Samuel shows up, right? Isn't it always like that? You know, it's like, where were you 5 minutes ago? Samuel goes, okay, what you doing, Saul? What have you done? And Saul launches into his justification for why he's done the burnt offering. And basically what Saul says is he says, I saw three things. And then he says, and this is the one that we really need to notice and pay attention to. He says, and I thought two things. See, this is how fear works. Usually there is something out there that is reasonable. There's a reasonable fear, something in your life. All of your lives, I'm sure there are things in your life where you go, ooh, that there is something to fear here that's reasonable. But then what happens is we start to think about it. And that's where if fear and insecurity and worry are running rampant inside of us, look out. Because then Saul says, and I did one thing. I saw three things, I thought two things, I did one thing. So what are the things? He says, okay, Samuel, I saw that my men were scattering and that you had not shown up yet, two things, and that the Philistine armies were gathering. Those are the facts, okay? That's reality in front, that's playing itself out in front of King Saul, okay? He goes, I saw three things. Men are scattering, you're not here, Philistines are assembling. And he goes, and I thought two things. He said, I thought the Philistines are going to come attack us, like right now. They're coming, we're going to be unprepared. And secondly, he said, I thought, we haven't done the burnt offering to ask for God's favor. And now I'm adding to it a little bit. And if we don't have God's favor, we're going to lose. They're going to slaughter us, or we're going to die, right? I'm sure his mind is cranking through here about what is actually going to happen, but by him interpreting reality out there. And this is where fear is twisting and turning it into something where then he goes, so, because I thought these things, I felt compelled to do the burnt offering. And friends, here's, if you take one thing away today, realize that if you let fear go, there's fears out there, but if you let them come into your mind, you start thinking about things that you're afraid of, and you're just letting fear and anxiety and worry go in your life, this is what's going to happen. It's going to twist things into something that will then make you feel like, I was compelled to do this. I was compelled. Well, of course you were. Because fear has been messing with your mind and your thinking. And so it's like, we don't come to the action and go, oh, now's the time of the action to go, well, maybe this isn't maybe fear is messing with you. Fear is messing with us. We have to recognize it as we're thinking. We have to go, oh my goodness, I'm going to the worst case scenario here. I hear you, brain, but you're lying to me right now, okay? I hear you, but I'm not gonna choose to believe you right now because that isn't actually what I'm facing in my life. There is a really good book, if you deal with fear, anxiety, and worry and insecurity in your life. I recommend a book called Overcoming Anxiety, Fear, and Worry by Dr. Gregory Jantz. And I want to read to you a quote from that book. He says, fear and anxiety are produced by what you tell yourself, not by what you actually experience. Think about that. I want to read it one more time. Fear and anxiety are produced by what you tell yourself, not by what you actually experience. See, it isn't just all these issues that are in your life that you're facing that are producing all of your worry and fear and anxiety. It's your thinking about them. It's what you're telling yourself about those things out there. And it's not that they don't exist or anything like that, but that it's that you're probably making them much worse. Your brain is like, and you can't shut it off. You're going, oh my gosh, I'm facing this thing. It's going to be the worst case scenario. It's happening, and then it causes you to go, I'm going to try to fix it myself, even if that means stepping over the line of what God wants of our life. That's what happened with Saul. He steps over the line. God had made this clear boundary line that he wasn't to cross over, but he allowed fear to shape his thinking and convinced him that he had to step over that line to save himself and his troops and his, country. Now, there's an impact for him doing this, for him allowing fear to run rampant inside of him and to have him step over this boundary line that God had laid out for him. And Samuel comes and delivers the bad news. Samuel goes, okay, Saul, you've done a foolish thing. He says, you have not obeyed the command of God. And then he says something that is absolutely fascinating. Don't miss this. He says, if you had obeyed God, okay, here's what would have happened. He would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time. But now your kingdom will not endure. In fact, the Lord's already sought out a man after his own heart. I love that Samuel, right after he makes the burnt offering, Samuel comes, and Samuel's already saying, God's already gone and sought after somebody else. He's already done it, right? But this is what I find so fascinating about this text. I'd never seen this before, but in my study this week, something struck me. That God had never shared this promise with Saul before this time. Saul had no idea how God was going to bless him and his ancestors if Saul would obey him. I think if God would have spoke through Samuel and said, hey, go and tell Saul, before all this happened, go and tell Saul, if you remain true to me and obey me, I will bless you and your kingdom, your kingship over the kingdom, and your kids' grandkids' kids' grandkids, like forever. And actually, what's going to happen is that at some point, I'm going to send my own son, and he's going to become king, and he's going to be in your lineage. Out of your line will come the Son of God, Jesus, okay, if you obey me. I bet if God would have sat down with Saul and laid that whole thing out, Saul might have tried harder. He might have had a different approach here. Maybe he would have been able to muster more faith and more obedience. But guess what? God kept all of that a secret until after Saul blew it. Okay? Here's why I think this is so interesting. I think God has secret plans for all of us of his goodness, of his blessing, of the wonderful things that he has for our life if we walk with him, if we obey him. And I think that we don't get a glimpse of that. We don't know all of that. And so we get stuck down here and we have fears and we're like Saul. We're going, oh my goodness, I see this and I see that and I see this. And I'm thinking about it and I'm going, oh my gosh, this is going to be the worst case scenario. I better fix it myself. And then we step across a boundary line that God's laid out for us. Instead of having the faith to go, I am seeing very real things out there that are terrifying me. But I believe that God is good, that he has my good in mind, and that he has secret plans that I don't even know about, that he hasn't shared with me, that if I walk in faith and obedience with him, that he's going to bless my life. There's a pastor that I read a blog post of his a number of years ago, and it stuck with me. And I just saw it in a new way reading this text. number of years ago, he writes this blog post about before he had a church, he was leading a church, he was thinking about what to do, and he had different plans in mind about what he was going to do for God, and he was meeting with a mentor. He was out to dinner with a mentor, and this mentor asked him the question, well, okay, you have some different ideas, but what would you do for God if you knew you couldn't fail? What if we just took fear and set it aside for a second and then ask the question, like, what would you do, right? This could be a wonderful question to ask yourself just in your own life. What would you do in your life if you knew you couldn't fail? What are your dreams? What do you wish you could go after, but you go, but I probably won't be able to get a job doing that, and so I'm going to go do something over here that pays me money, and but what if you just went like, what's my dream? Like, what if I knew I couldn't fail? Some of you'd be like, I would ask that person out right now, but I'm just terrified. I can't do that, right? Whatever it is for you, okay? Not a bad question to ask yourself. Like, what kind of choices would we make in our life if we just didn't have any fear? Well, this pastor is sitting down with this mentor. He goes, the answer that he had to that question is, he said, I just knew immediately I would plant a church. That's what I would do for God if I knew I couldn't fail. And so the mentor shot back and he said, well, if you don't plant a church, then you're a coward. Which is harsh, right? I don't think I would want that mentor in my life, honestly. But for this guy, it hit him, and he kind of rose to the challenge. Was like, oh, you're right. And he plants a church. Well, over the next 15 years, that church grew to become one of the largest churches in America. 2 years ago, though, that pastor blew his life up because of addiction. There was a problem in his character, in the inside that no one could see, until it just blew up. He lost his church, lost his marriage. He has a kid, and thankfully he still has a relationship with his child, but his marriage is over. And kind of, being aware of that story and how it played out, I saw that initial question in a different way after reading this text. Because while I think it can be helpful to say, hey, what would you do if you just took fear out of your life? If you knew you couldn't fail at something, what would you do? Yeah, that's a fine question, but I think there's such a better question to ask in light of what we're seeing with Saul. And I think it's, what would God do in your life if you had the faith to fully obey him? What would God do if you fully obeyed him? See, so often we think we have the best idea. Like, I want to pursue my dream. I know what's best for me. I'm pursuing these things. Oh, if I could just do this. Yes, if we could get fear out of the way so I could do what I want to do. Whether it's for you or even for God. This pastor was for God. What I want to do for God, okay? Well, that's okay, but really the question is about obedience. It's not that we have to come up with all these great things to do for our life and for God. God has the great ideas about what he wants to give and bless and use us in our lives for. Our job is to go, God, what if I fully obeyed you? What would that look like? What if I just fully said yes to God and had the confidence that he really does have secret plans for our good, for our blessing and our good, and wants to lead us toward amazing things that are better than we could even ask or imagine, right? That's the story of Saul. It's the story of Saul thinking he had to fix his own life and that he had to take his kingdom into his own hands. Meanwhile, God was secretly going, man, if you obey me, not only am I going to bless your kingdom, I'm going to bless your kids and grandkids and great-grandkids and the lineage of your entire family, and that Jesus Christ is going to come from your kingship. My goodness, is there a greater honor than that? I mean, I know that like when we get to heaven, we're probably not supposed to be boasting and stuff, but I bet the guy that actually happened with, King David, the next king, because Saul's lineage didn't even last to his son. The kingdom got transferred to a different guy that's not related to Saul, the very next king, King David. And he's a pretty good guy that, for the most part, obeyed God. He was not perfect. We're going to look at some of his faults too. But he was good enough to where the lineage of Jesus Christ comes from David, right? I bet David and his ancestors are going to be walking around going, oh, hi, in heaven. Hi, nice to meet you. Did you know that Jesus came from my lineage? Did you know that? I don't know if you knew that. I don't know. It just was one of those, I mean, like, that's a cool thing. I mean, that's something that's like, wow. Saul missed it. Saul missed it because of fear. He missed it because of fear, because he thought that he knew what was best and how to fix the situation rather than having faith and trust in God and believing that God has secret plans for our good. Let's stand up together and pray. I want to pray into fear. I want to, for those of you that have some of this in your life, fear, anxiety, worry, whether it's like a generalized anxiety disorder or whether you have something very specific that is just sitting like a monkey on your shoulder that is just messing with you. I want to pray that God would just break the back of fear in our life, would just break it in a big way today and fill us with faith. If you want to pray that with me, would you put a hand in the air, reach out toward God, reach out toward his spirit and his spirit's power to come into your life. And God, we ask, we confess that we have fear, that we have anxieties, that we have worries, that we have insecurities in our life, God, that are unhealthy, that have grown to a place that is not helpful for us in our life, and some of which even is getting in the way of our obedience to you. And we ask, God, for you to put fear to death, to break the back of it inside of us, Jesus. Would your spirit, oh God, come in your power, and would you move on us, God? And would you increase faith? Would you just plant the seeds of faith, of trust in you that would grow into huge trees and branches that we could grab onto, that would have strength, God? We pray that there would be something internally for us to really grab a hold of in the moment of fear, in the moment of anxiety and worry. God, give us the ability to grab hold of our faith and our trust in you. That you are good, that you do have secret plans for our good, that you haven't even shared with us, but that we can trust in you, that the more that we obey you, the more that we follow after you in obedience, the more that you can bless us, the more that you give to us. Pray, God, that you would help us to have confidence in the things we cannot see, confidence in your goodness in our lives. In the name of Jesus, amen.